Vietnam's realized foreign direct investment hit a record $27.6 billion in 2025. 82.8% of that money poured directly into manufacturing. Companies are building factories, expanding production lines, and hiring hundreds of thousands of workers across the country. And the headlines reflect it. Vietnam is the new global manufacturing hub, the poster child for companies finally diversifying their supply chains out of China. It seems like the great decoupling is here, and Vietnam is the primary beneficiary. But there's an issue with this widely accepted theory. I dug through the numbers, and what they reveal is far more complex than a simple transfer of production. The reality is that for many products stamped made in Vietnam, the country's role is far more about final assembly and packaging than it is about true manufacturing independence. This isn't a replacement of China, it's often a strategic relabeling, a crucial last step performed in Vietnam before goods ship worldwide. The entire strategy, known as China Plus One, aims to reduce risk, but it doesn't necessarily sever the deep economic ties that still bind global supply chains to China. It comes down to three hidden layers of dependence that shape Vietnam's manufacturing boom. The first hidden layer is simply one of scale. China didn't become the factory of the world overnight, and no other nation can replicate its sheer industrial depth in a few short years. Consider the scale of inputs. In 2025 alone, China remained Vietnam's largest trading partner, supplying nearly 40% of its total import volume. This isn't just raw materials, it's critical components, advanced machinery, and specialized tooling. For instance, Vietnam imported over $182 billion worth of goods from China in 2025, an increase of over $38 billion from 2024. This massive inflow of parts, particularly electronics and machinery, underpins much of what Vietnam then exports. This creates a peculiar geographic irony. While companies publicly announce their new factories in Vietnam, a substantial portion of the components feeding those factories still embark on a much shorter journey across the border from China. Think of it like this. A company might proudly announce a new smartphone assembly plant in Vietnam, creating thousands of local jobs. Yet, the advanced microchips, the high-resolution displays, and even the precision-engineered camera modules often arrive from existing suppliers located just a few hundred miles north in China. This means that while the final assembly line has moved, the intricate, high-value-added parts of the supply chain remain firmly rooted in China's established ecosystem. It's a subtle but critical distinction that often gets lost in the headlines. The second hidden layer is the nature of the manufacturing process itself. Vietnam has become a powerhouse in what is often called downstream production. This means taking imported inputs and assembling them into final goods for export. For example, Samsung's operations in Vietnam are immense. Its factories in Bac Ninh and Thanh Nguyen provinces had produced 2 billion handsets by June 2025. As of January 2026, these facilities produce around half of every Galaxy phone sold worldwide. But even for a giant like Samsung, Vietnam's role has historically been focused on assembly, testing, and packaging. While Vietnam is making strides moving up the value chain, with new investments in chip testing and semiconductor substrate manufacturing, for example, the majority of high-tech components still originate elsewhere. This specialization is a geographic reality. China built decades of expertise and infrastructure in producing the entire range of components, from the simplest screw to the most complex integrated circuit. Vietnam, while rapidly developing, cannot instantly replicate this deep, broad industrial base. So, when a product is finished on a Vietnamese factory floor, it often involves workers installing Chinese-made screens into Chinese-made casings, powered by Chinese-made circuit boards, before being packaged in Vietnamese boxes for export to the United States or Europe. The Made in Vietnam label, in many cases, accurately reflects the country of final assembly. But it doesn't tell the full story of where the product's value was truly created. This is a critical distinction for understanding global trade flows. The third hidden layer is the strategic intent behind China Plus One. Companies adopting this strategy aren't necessarily looking to abandon China entirely. Instead, they are seeking to reduce concentration risk by diversifying their production footprint. The goal is resilience, not replacement. This approach gained significant momentum due to rising labor costs in China, geopolitical tensions, and the severe supply chain disruptions experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. By having an additional manufacturing base, companies can mitigate risks like tariffs, natural disasters, or unexpected factory shutdowns in a single country. The data supports this diversification, not divorce thesis. Many newer Chinese firms themselves are investing in Vietnam, using it as an export platform. A report from July 2026 noted that these newer Chinese firms operating in Vietnam are heavily reliant on their home country for imports, with 70% of their inputs coming from China. They are also more focused on exporting to the US market from Vietnam, suggesting a strategic maneuver to navigate tariffs and trade policies. This is a fascinating twist. China, the very country many firms are ostensibly moving away from, is simultaneously deepening its own integration with Vietnam's manufacturing sector. It's a pragmatic response from businesses, using geographic arbitrage to play the global trade game. This strategic interplay highlights Vietnam's unique geographic position. Its long land border with China makes it an ideal location for this kind of last-mile manufacturing. Components can be trucked or shipped efficiently from Chinese industrial zones to Vietnamese assembly plants. This proximity allows companies to leverage China's established supplier networks while still benefiting from Vietnam's competitive labor costs and extensive network of free trade agreements. Vietnam has signed over 15 major free trade agreements covering more than 50 economies, including crucial access to the US and EU markets. This gives companies a powerful incentive to perform final assembly in Vietnam, as it can qualify their products for preferential tariff rates when exported to these major consumer markets. But this reliance also comes with its own set of vulnerabilities. If disruptions occur further upstream in China's supply chains, Vietnamese factories can quickly face shortages. A delay at a Chinese port or a factory shutdown in a Chinese industrial hub can ripple almost immediately into Vietnamese operations, impacting production across electronics, textiles, and machinery sectors. The dream of a fully independent parallel supply chain in Vietnam remains a long-term goal, one that requires significant investment in developing local component suppliers and advanced manufacturing capabilities. For Vietnam to truly move beyond its role as a low-end foundry or final assembly hub, it needs to develop its own industrial ecosystem for precision tooling and component production. This is not to diminish Vietnam's impressive economic transformation. The country's strategic policies, skilled workforce, and commitment to attracting foreign investment have been hugely successful. Vietnam's economy grew by 8.02% in 2025, with manufacturing and processing driving much of that growth. It is rapidly expanding into electronics, precision engineering, and higher-value manufacturing, aiming to climb further up the global value chain. Major players like LG Innotek are investing in semiconductor substrate manufacturing in Haiphong, and Samsung is building a chip testing factory in Tai Nguyen. These are significant steps toward building more self-sufficient and sophisticated industrial capabilities. However, the current reality for a vast swath of goods labeled Made in Vietnam is one of deep, continued integration with the Chinese manufacturing behemoth. It is a testament to China's enduring gravitational pull in global manufacturing, where even efforts to diversify often end up rerouting through its massive industrial heartland. The economic geography of Asia dictates that for now, Vietnam's rise is less about replacing China and more about skillfully integrating with it, performing the critical last steps in a supply chain that remains, in many ways, fundamentally Chinese. The map shows a new production hub, but the ledger reveals a deeply intertwined economic destiny. A significant driver for this China Plus One strategy, especially for American companies, is the mechanism of U.S. import tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. Since 2018, the United States has levied duties, in some cases up to 25%, on various products from China. To avoid these tariffs, companies leverage rules of origin regulations. These rules dictate that a product's country of origin is generally where it underwent its last substantial transformation. For many products, merely assembling components and performing final processing in Vietnam is sufficient to qualify for a Made in Vietnam label, thereby circumventing the higher tariffs on Chinese origin goods. Consider U.S. apparel giant Nike. In its fiscal year 2025, Vietnamese factories produced approximately 51% of all Nike footwear, compared to just 17% from China and 28% from Indonesia. While Nike heavily relies on Vietnamese assembly, it still sources numerous components and materials from its broader Asian supply chain, which includes Chinese suppliers. Similarly, Apple has increasingly shifted production of products like AirPods, Apple Watches, and MacBooks to Vietnam, aiming for an estimated 65% of AirPods assembly to be in Vietnam by 2025. Yet, even for these complex devices, many high-value components, from specialized chips to displays, continue to originate from China's advanced industrial ecosystem. This highlights a clear mechanism. Final assembly in Vietnam allows these American brands to tap into lower labor costs and favorable trade agreements while navigating complex tariff landscapes. The challenge for companies genuinely aiming for full decoupling from China, rather than just diversification, is immense. Replicating China's decades-old, deeply integrated manufacturing infrastructure with its vast supplier networks, skilled workforce, and efficient logistics is extraordinarily costly and time-consuming. According to a July 2026 report by consulting firm EY Parthenon, duplicating China-linked supply chains across the US and Europe could require a staggering $23.6 trillion in public and private investment by 2050. For the United States alone, this figure is estimated at $13.7 trillion. It's a sum that dramatically illustrates why most companies opt for the pragmatic integration offered by Vietnam rather than a full, expensive divorce. However, some American companies are moving beyond simple assembly, making more substantial investments in Vietnam's higher-value manufacturing. U.S. semiconductor giant Intel, for example, operates its largest assembly and testing facility in Vietnam, and in June 2026 announced an additional $2.6 billion investment, bringing its total committed capital in the country to $4.1 billion. This expansion includes relocating production lines for high-end server chips from Costa Rica to Vietnam, underscoring a strategic deepening of manufacturing capabilities beyond basic consumer electronics. Similarly, Coherent Corporation, a leading U.S. manufacturer of optical materials and semiconductor components, opened a $127 million facility in Dong Nai in July 2025, producing silicon carbide components and precision photonics for AI and cloud datacom chains. These investments indicate a move towards more complex upstream processes in Vietnam, yet they remain tightly integrated into broader Asian supply chains, often still relying on components and expertise from China. The ultimate challenge for companies genuinely aiming for full decoupling from China, rather than just diversification, is immense. Subscribe to TradeWind, and the next video is waiting for you on screen right now.